So as you've gotten the sense that this morning is about looking into the future, how do we put it all together? The next presentation is going to focus on markets and what my new friend Brent Sherwood has said to me in a call recently, that helium-3, if we can successfully access it, could be the single most important economic driver for the lunar surface there is. So that's what we're going to talk about. There's a new interesting company called Helium-3 Mining, and is headed by Chris Salvini, and you saw his video earlier. So with that, I'm going to let Chris come on up and share with you his vision. Chris?
Thank you. Well, good morning. This is going to be a super exciting topic. I hope you guys like it. The topic is helium-3 mining. Is this the tip of the spear for a sustained lunar economy to supply eco-friendly fusion and quantum computing on Earth? My disclaimer is you may fall asleep, you might be intrigued. The whole intent is to focus, foster, and inspire. The ultimate question is mining the moon for lunar helium-3 the innovation that reshapes our future and reduces greenhouse gases? The singular focus of the company that we work on is to provide lunar helium-3 for future Earth-based needs. We're going to talk about these today. That's nuclear fusion reaction when done with helium-3. That creates a green energy source along with quantum computing. I won't have time to go over my background extensively, but I want to point out the thing that's in yellow. I knew nothing about helium-3 until I did a degree in planetary geology, and that just began to spark my interest. To understand helium-3 on the moon requires a complete discipline across the board of different people, which I'll talk about towards the end. The agenda in 15 to 20 minutes is going to be very aggressive. We're going to talk about what helium-3 actually is, potentially how you would use it in nuclear fusion and quantum computing, wild swags at revenue, so please don't yell at me when you see these numbers, where you can get helium-3 from, if you had to mine it on the moon, some technical challenges which I really want to spend some time on, and then a little bit about our company towards the end. Helium-3 is an isotope of helium. It comes from the sun. It travels in the solar wind along with helium-4. It gets captured by the Earth's atmosphere, so it's basically extremely rare. On the moon, there's no atmosphere, so it's been baked into the regolith for 4.5 billion years. Between multiple ways of analyzing this, including the Apollo samples, it's estimated that there's between 1 and 15 parts per billion, which is kind of diffuse, but collectively across the whole surface, it's estimated that the reserves for helium-3 approaches 1 million tons. Spoiler alert, that's enough to fuel nuclear fusion for hundreds of years. Now, why are we going back to the moon? The first 3 bullet points have been discussed over the past day and a half and are known fairly well. Scientific research, potentially global competition. I would argue preparing for Mars is a very important technique to do on the moon. These are laudable public focuses. The question is, are they sustainable? I will argue there's a potential 4th reason to go to the moon. The question is there a resource valuable enough on the moon to return back to Earth to eventually have a positive return on investment? This will more than likely start out as a public and private focus. To get to that question, let's first look at a little bit about evolution. The moon was formed when a large Mars-sized object impacted on Earth, ejecting out magma. So if you believe that, which most planetary scientists do, then the isotopes on the moon are the same as the isotopes on Earth. So the titanium on the Earth is the same thing as titanium on the moon. The real question is the concentration. I'm from Arizona. There's copper mines in Arizona. You mine copper where it's highly concentrated, not where it's low concentration. So does that concept hold up on the moon? The natural process of concentrating minerals on Earth is through plate tectonics, the movements of wind and water, and volcanism. That's why we have areas of high concentration, low concentration. On the moon, all we really have is volcanism. The assumption is minerals are much more diffuse. So ultimate question is, if the moon has the same minerals on Earth, but in less concentrated form, why would you mine these Earth-based minerals? This next slide kind of summarizes some of the things we've talked about so far. The Earth-based minerals that we just discussed in the last slide are technically mineable. They're not financially feasible at the present moment due to low concentrations, and that most likely includes rare earth elements. However, the resource that comes from the sun, helium-3, is in plentiful quantity on the moon. But there's three questions that should be asked. Is there an Earth-based need? Is there an Earth-based source? And is there a case for lunar mining? Two major future use cases for helium-3. First is nuclear fusion. Here's a fundamental question. These electric vehicles, are they green? My son drives an electric vehicle. He thinks it's green. Many people think they're green. The question is, where does the fuel come from, which is electricity? Unfortunately, 70–80% of the world's electricity comes from the burning of fossil fuels or nuclear fission. On the con side of fossil fuels, as most people are aware, this produces gases such as carbon dioxide that contributes to the greenhouse effect. In fact, it's so bad, last year alone, the amount of fossil fuels that burned, if you look at the CO2 alone, it would fill 10 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. On the cons for fission, radioactive waste has to be stored up to 100,000 years. We've had a catastrophic explosion in Chernobyl, and we now have leaking storage facilities. So many people think that the future of electricity on Earth is nuclear fusion, not fission. Fusion is a reaction in which two or more atomic nuclei are fused together under extreme temperatures, and ultimately the goal is to release more energy than you put in. You want to get more energy out. There's two major reactions to talk about. That's between deuterium and tritium. Deuterium is easily produced. Tritium comes as a byproduct of nuclear fission. That produces normal helium, a neutron, and energy. Our company coins that fusion 1.0. If you substitute helium for tritium, you get normal helium, a proton energy, and we call that fusion 2.0. The pros of fusion, it does not explode. You won't have another Chernobyl. The differences has to do with the fuel source. With helium-3, there's no radioactive waste. Eventually, we believe that will create the world's first green energy source when you use helium-3. This has always been talked about to be 30 years out, but it's getting closer to reality. In fact, the first commercial contract is in just a few years between Helion Energy and Microsoft. Ultimately, over the next 10 or 20 years, the vision is nuclear fusion will begin to replace fossil fuels and fission as fuel sources for electricity production. As you hear about nuclear fusion, it's important to understand the differences in the fuel sources. Tritium and helium-3 both cannot explode, but this is where they differ. If you look in the green-hand column or the left-hand column, helium does not require containment of byproducts, which is important, does not cause significant reactor degradation, is markedly less dangerous for humans, and has a higher energy yield. We believe when fusion is done with helium-3, that's when you achieve true green energy. Where do we stand in development? On the left-hand side of the screen, there's been more than $6 billion spent on fusion by more than 40 companies in 10 countries. Their technical readiness level is somewhere between 3 and 6. Very little has been spent on helium-3 because they don't know where to get it. On the opposite side of the screen, where do we stand with mining helium-3? That's in its very beginning of infancy. We have sample confirmation from Apollo and Chang 5. There are governments talking about doing this now. There are private companies, including ours, and a branch of Blue Origin and probably some others. That's more at its technical readiness level, somewhere between 1 and 3 or maybe 1 and 4. The numbers are pretty staggering. Bloomberg predicts this could be a $40 trillion industry. If all electricity was produced by fusion, if you follow the math here, you need about 2,900 fusion reactors worldwide, and they would consume 570 metric tons of helium-3 per year. Let's go to the second use case of helium-3, and that probably is, that could be with quantum computing coming up real soon. Quantum computing uses qubits as opposed to bits. While it's still experimental, applications are rapidly developing. Here's a great example of speed differences. If you took a 2048-bit integer and tried to break it down into its primary components, that would take a classical computer 10,000 years, and a quantum computer could do it in less than a day. The applications are mind-boggling, from cryptography to drug discovery to optimization of serious complex problems. What does this have to do with helium-3? Quantum computers have to be cooled down to nearly Kelvin, 0 degree Kelvin at 0.01. The only way to do this is with a combination of helium-3 and helium-4. So helium-3 is designed and needed in order for quantum computers to work successfully. These numbers on this slide are somewhat diffuse because it's difficult to come by. However, each quantum computer is estimated to need between 1 and 10 liters of helium-3. There'll be some degradation per year. If you assume a lifespan of at least 5 years, really rough numbers, each quantum computer may need 6 liters of helium-3. It's difficult to find predictions for how many quantum computers will be in the future, but it's probably pretty conservative to think there'll be at least 10,000 by 2040. They would require 4 metric tons of helium-3. Revenue projections, this is where there's a swag. Don't focus on an individual number, focus on the concept. Today's helium-3 prices are actually slightly less than tritium at $30,000 a gram, or $30 billion per metric ton. Future prices more than likely will be dictated by market conditions and will fluctuate up or down. But if you use today's numbers, for fusion, that would translate into $17 trillion per year of revenue on the helium-3 side. Quantum computing comes in at a distant 120 billion. Where can you get helium-3 from if you want to use it? Primarily comes from a byproduct of nuclear weapons production. There's less than 20 kilos in the United States and dwindling. You cannot mine it, you cannot produce it. It's been speculated that it could be a byproduct of actual fusion reactors, in which it could be caught in the blankets of the fusion reactors. But for the most part, you cannot get helium-3 on Earth if you want to use it for fusion or quantum computing. Therefore, we need to look off Earth, and we come back to the moon's surface. This is an important concept. In order for helium-3 mining to be successful, 3 things need to take place. Number 1, the bottom left, fusion needs to be commercialized, and we're coming close to that. Second, we need to have reduction in transportation costs. This was discussed yesterday, but in proportion, we've gone from $20,000 to low Earth orbit to soon to be under $100 per kilo to low Earth orbit. Can that same thing happen with going to the moon? And finally, you cannot use Earth-based mining techniques for the moon. We're going to spend the next couple slides discussing this, and that's where I think our company and others are going to really capitalize on this. You have to mine the moon by thinking like the moon. Now, many people would argue this is not the future of lunar mining, but there's some mining principles that are in this slide that are very important. This is a gold mine in Australia, and the way you get the gold out of the ground is you blast it first. That requires energy. You take the ore to a processing plant, you extract the gold from the waste rock called tailings, which requires more energy. That's an open pit gold mine. The same mining principles apply across the scope of the Earth, from open pit mining to underground mining. This might look more like lunar mining, but the same mining principles apply. There's energy involved with that bucket wheel in the front to grind up the ground. The ore goes into the processing plant inside the rover, and there's more energy required to extract out the valuable resource. So now let's really delve down into some select, very challenging problems. Number 1, the concentration of helium-3 on the moon is between 1 and 15 parts per billion. Compare that to a copper mine at 0.5 parts per 100. If you use standard Earth mining processes, whether in a rover or a centralized processing plant, you basically are saying we're going to extract 1 part helium from 999 million parts of unusable tailings. This is impractical from an energy perspective, so consequently we have begun to look at novel, low-energy extraction processes that are lunar-based. The next one many people are familiar with, the next big challenge is lunar dust. It's sharp, it's spiky because there's been no erosion, it's 45% silica like glass, it's charged and can levitate above the ground. It has two types of iron related to it, and unlike earth dust, it's especially abrasive and clingy. This is a time to look back at a lesson from Apollo and Gene Cernan when he said, a very important quote, "I think we can overcome other physical, and mechanical problems except dust." A very, very important point. Well, let's look at some practical issues. Equipment. Apollo 17, 22 hours on the surface. Look what happened in 22 hours. It destroyed some vacuum sample seals. It eroded multiple layers of Harrison Schmidt's boot. It compromised a shoulder joint movement and adhered to virtually everything, especially if you look at that picture. We believe the key to dealing with dust is from the very beginning in designing equipment. You have to minimize the complexity and reduce the number of key parts to the bare bones minimum. This is in addition to mitigation strategies that are being developed by NASA and universities, such as coatings on top of materials. If you assume a human is going to go with you to the moon and be part of this whole entire process, if the human breathes in lunar dust, that's going to cause all sorts of problems based on duration, how much they breathe in, and particle size. You can have all sorts of bad issues such as silicosis, COPD, or brain damage. Ironically, the smaller the particle, the more damage it does. It can actually cross the lung, go into the blood, and go to the brain. I am convinced that lunar mining base stations, there's no way, despite mitigation strategies, that they will be able to keep out the dust completely. So our company's been working on facial source control devices that are wearable that will reduce the inhalation of dust that will be inside a lunar habitat. There's other challenges that we will not have time for. This is just a few lists of some of them. Heat dissipation due to lack of atmosphere. Heat does not dissipate. The regolith 4 billion years ago was loose, but over time it's been compacted down. There's 300-degree temperature changes over the course of a month, and the solar constant is extremely high compared to Earth. So you have to understand these challenges and work within a constructive way. For example, heat dissipation. Not good for your mechanical engineering equipment, but it might be useful when you're heating the regolith if the heat does not dissipate. A couple slides in our company. When we designed the company, we said we've got a blank sheet of paper. We need to design the mining process by thinking outside the box, and we have to work with the moon and not against it. Not one particular discipline can understand the moon. That's what I found out fairly quickly. It takes a team of people with diverse minds and collaborative intervention to actually try to figure out how to extract this valuable resource from the moon. If you had to focus our company on one singular slide, it's this. We are basically looking at efficiently extracting helium-3 from the moon and bringing it back to Earth. At the core of this is we're trying to understand, leverage, and avoid resisting the environment. We've worked on a systems engineering approach using agile management, and if you look at the steps to the right, we focus on everything from how to mine and where to mine, where's the highest concentration, all the way up to compressing the gas. The next steps for our company is to advance our technical readiness levels, and we need to begin to work on strategic partnerships. This slide brings back the title slide full circle. If we want to build a lunar economy, we believe it's going to be through the potential mining of lunar helium-3. We believe that's a way for a sustainable lunar presence. If you do that, we're going to need supporting infrastructure from transportation down to strategic partnerships. And then finally, the summary slide here. There is an estimated 1 million tons of helium-3 on the moon, enough to fuel nuclear fusion for hundreds of years. The two major use cases we talked about today were fusion 2.0 and quantum computing. the revenue stream is fairly impressive. To mine it successfully, you need to do three things at once. Reduction in transportation cost, we are approaching commercialization, and you've got to mine the moon based on lunar mining techniques. And the final point at the very bottom, to bring home the point one more time, our company believes that the tip of the spear for a sustainable lunar economy is mining lunar helium-3 for Earth-based needs. Around that, we're going to need to build infrastructure and partnerships for support. And I know we're out of time for questions, but if any of these questions, I'll take questions at lunch, so thank you again.